Man, there's just some of the things that you can do leading up to a reptile show or anything where you're trying to sell your ball pythons from your fruits of your effort that could seriously derail you. In this video, I'm going to cover just 5 things that can possibly ruin your vending experience at an expo. Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's Paul with Spheric Reptiles, and I thank you so much for tuning into this video on breeding mistakes that can ruin your reptile expo sales. I think that's very important to just really stress your reptile expo sales, especially in today's market where it's a little different than it was in COVID. Like in COVID, if you build it, they came, right? They came and they bought up everything you had. People were able to buy houses, buy trucks, pay college tuitions, all of those things. But now that the market has actually normalized where it actually probably should be, even though I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but people don't go to reptile expos normally to spend $1,000 on a snake. I mean, it's just, where they do that at? I mean, I know that there are some people like breeders that choose to invest in these animals so that they can have animals that they can reproduce, primarily to sell to other breeders. But if you're a new ball python breeder, I don't want you to set yourself up with a false sense of hope and that you're going to produce an animal that someone will want to pay $1,000 for. If you make the right animal, people will pay for it. But the average animal that you reproduce may not be the one that people are willing to spend, the lure amount, which is, I think, the highest priced animal today on Morph Market on March the 7th is $60,000, and it's a sunset ultra male that's ready to breed. Now they want 60 grand for that. So if that's your carrot before the horse or your worm on the hook for the big fish, I don't want you to set yourself up for that type of expectation when in all actuality, the breeders who have developed that and get that right to sell the animals that cost a lot more, and let's just be frank, they put in the time. So we can't erase the time and the trust that those breeders have achieved. But say you're a new ball python breeder or even an existing ball python breeder, and you produce a clutch of eggs. Say you produce 5 clutches of eggs, and it's like 40 hatchlings that you have, and you say, I'm going to vend a reptile show. Well, a lot of people who start breeding early on want to hurry up and run the paces and get into those reptile expos or even open a Morph Market page. And you can do whatever you want, but what I'm saying is just be reasonable about this and fair balance the pros and the cons of doing each one. What I'm really trying to get you to do is to just think. Remember, I'm always saying think and do your research. So I don't want you to ruin your first experience, and I don't want you to damage your brand, right? So anytime you get out there and you start vending, you're either going to have positive experience and your customers will have a positive experience, or you'll have a negative experience and your customers might have a negative experience. We want to limit the negative experiences and improve on the positive experiences. I'm just going to cover 5 quick mistakes that you could possibly make that can ruin your reptile expo sales. And I want you to let me know if you feel that these are things that can actually help you. Remember, this channel is all about you. So I'm really just trying to give you the pearls of wisdom that I see for this video. Mistake number 1, not planning enough animals, right? So not having enough animals. So that's the number 1 thing that will derail you. If your surplus isn't there, typically you can go with one, like say if you get your own table space and you pay $125 to about $425, depending on which expo you're trying to vend, and you only take 1 rack of animals. So someone could come by there and see those animals. Definitely, if you got some banger animals, they're going to stop and they're going to see them. But if you scheduled a couple of expos and you've already paired up all of your animals, you need at least 10 months before you can pair up those females again. A lot of the times it's even more than that because not all females develop follicles to 10 millimeters at the same rate. And in doing so, what you're doing is you will limit the amount of animals that you have just in the raw supply, no matter where you're trying to sell them at. So that is a limiting factor. And when you're breeding, you got to remember, out of these same clutches, you'll have holdbacks, you'll have animals that take a little bit longer to feed, and all these other things. But in particular, this is setting up like your structure of what you're trying to do, right? So what I'm saying is the key would be to prevent this is to make sure that you get through one season and you try to sell those animals, whether it's on Morph Market or to your friends, or try to figure out a way to move these animals before you actually start pairing up those females with those males. And then if you can get to where you're, I'm going to say about 10 clutches, then you're ready for an expo. Because if you say 10 times the average of even 6 will be 60, or times 8 will be 80, and that will be enough animals to get you through a year of vending expos. And when I say a year of vending expos, I'm talking about 4 expos. Now, you could definitely vend more, but I'm going to say about 4 expos, 80 animals. That'll be enough to where you can actually take some of your best examples to the show. And it's all about taking your best examples so that people can see the supply that you have, the effort that you put into it, and you get to improve on your brand and give your customers a positive experience. Mistake number 2, poor timing in your clutches coming, right? So say you have your first Reptile Expo in February and you've already prepaid for this back in November of the previous year, and now this expo is upon you, but you started pairing up your ball pythons in September with the expectation that they would be here and they would be ready by February. Well, that's not very realistic, because September, October, November, December, January, February, that's only 6 months. It's going to take your ball pythons, they might actually go and lay within 3 months if you catch them right before they're at that optimum follicle size for ovulation, right? So I'm not going to say it's impossible, but realistically, your ball pythons are hovering around at 5 millimeters, and then all of a sudden, the female body starts to reproduce that follicle stimulating hormone, and then those follicles grow with your proper feeding from 5 to 10 millimeters, and then you pair them up, and then each month that's a 10 millimeter growth. So if it's optimum, then it will take you at least 2 months, if it's just the perfect conditions, for that female to go from 10 to 20 and 20 to 30. So that's all of September, all of October, and then she has to go another month to go from 30 to 40, and then maybe 45. So you're looking from September, October, November, and then half of December, she'll go through ovulation. Then she'll go through an ovulation shed, and about 20 days later, on average, she'll go through a prelay shed, and then about 30 to 45 days later, then she'll actually lay that clutch of eggs. 55 to 60 days later, then those eggs will hatch in the incubator, and then you got to get those animals on food. So you're already past February by that time, right? Because the days and the numbers just don't add up. That's going to put you past your original date. And if you don't have the animals, then you have to decide on if you're going to be able to vend that show or not. So that timing is key. So what I want you to really focus on is, well, we can't make the animals get ready sooner, right? You can feed them, but that'll only make them fat if you try to force feed them or you feed them too much. However, you do know that your pairings, you should probably start those expos the second half of the year. So normally expos start to kick back up once school gets back. And so we're looking at the local reptile expos September, October, November, which is when you will be repairing up the other animals that maybe didn't go. So that's a good rule of thumb. And I know that you would have to wait a while, right? But it's better to wait and have those animals at their optimum weight, get established in feeding, and then you know more about them. So you got to think about that customer experience. You're able to transfer more information over to them. So if you get the clutch pairings right on just the time that you're expecting the hatchlings, and then you're able to get them going by the time they get to you handing them over to the customer, it's just a better experience for everybody. So I'm not talking about the acclimation thing, which I think a lot of people go through that. When you buy a hatchling, anything below 350 grams, I'm going to say, and I know that might be in juvenile stage, but in all senses, that's like a hatchling or early juvenile. Mistake number 3 is not having established feeding habits for those hatchlings, right? And when I say by established feeding habits, I mean any animal that's under 200 to 250 grams and we're not talking about them going from your place, your breeding facility, to someone else's home where they put them in a large enclosure and they maybe just don't go on feeding. We're talking about you know that this animal is not a consistent feeder. It skips meals. It's inconsistent in every way. You feed it live, you offer it a live prey item, it doesn't take it. You offer it a frozen thawed item, and it doesn't take it. This is an animal that even if it grows, a lot of the times these animals are passed over to the customer, and they're unaware of the difficulties that you had. They just get a snake, it's the right size to them, but they need a full story on this animal. So, and that's why I like using Husbandry Pro, because then I can give them the QR code and they can see all of the sheds, all of the feedings, and then we can discuss why this animal's weight is a little bit lower, because not all animals are born perfect feeders, right? So sometimes you might have to assist feed them, and it takes them a little bit longer for them to get up to speed, because when you're having to assist feed, you're doing that with a smaller prey item. And then if an animal skips meals, then it's really not ready to go until it consistently takes meals once a week as a hatchling, so it can grow in its linear growth curve, which I always talk about, the linear growth curve. But more importantly, you get to hand someone over an animal that is 100% healthy and feeding, and the only thing we got to worry about then is that if their enclosure that customer is putting them in is crowded enough for that animal to start feeling secure, because you got to remember, this is so important. And I come across this not a lot, but when I do, I already know how to handle it just from experience. The animals in your breeding facility will be around other animals that they've always been around. So the scents, the smells, the humidity, it's what they know. Now, if they go into another home, you don't know what the ambient room temperatures are. That snake has to acclimate to the temperature, the heat, the people. They might be handling the snake a lot. But either way, you want to make sure that this snake goes to them with all of the opportunities to thrive as a good feeder, so that both parties, the snake and the owners, are happy. Mistake number 4, not taking the time to plan. Talking about the SWOT analysis. What are you actually trying to create in ball pythons? Are you just out there doing a shotgun approach, just wanting to breed any animal? Or are you very specific in a definite projects that you want to produce? Now, I've talked to a lot of breeders about this, and it seems like the realistic thing is this. If you choose 1 or 2 breeding projects and you hyper focus on that, you're going to get the best genes, incomplete dominant and recessive genes into this project. And in the beginning, the playing field will be equal because you're just starting out. But as you start to produce those visuals or the examples of what you want, what you'll notice is that your animals are actually excelling and exceeding those of the other people, because they're not hyper focusing on it. So say if, for our case, we're trying to make the True Ghost, the TSK Hypo True Ghost, and when we start adding in those incomplete dominant traits and the additional recessive traits to it, this animal will be something that more people are not able to see. So if you think about that for you, whatever project that you're trying to work, whether it's a Desert Ghost Clown, and you choose to add in Hypo, you choose to add in Puzzle, you choose to add in Monsoon, whatever it is, once you start doing that and you start stacking those incomplete dominants by your focus and your concentration on that breeding project, the number one thing you're going to do is you will help to establish your brand. So eventually, when people start to think about those animals, think about Ozzy with the Orange Dream. You think about Orange Dream, the first thing that comes into mind once you get some knowledge about the ball python industry and the breeders is you think of Ozzy, and that's just what you do. It's like if you think of Tri-Stripe, a lot of people might think of some other people, but the first thing that comes to my mind is Kyle Frost. And I'm just saying there's other people who do it, but when I think of those incomplete or recessive traits, just those 2 in particular, those are the first things that come into mind. And so that's what you want to do. Is doesn't matter how big you are, you want to start early on in establishing that this is your breeding project and this is what you're focused on. So when people go to an expo and they know that you're there, they're going to stop by and look at what you got, if they're even interested in those projects or obtaining those as pets. Mistake number 5, and this is one that's near and dear to a lot of breeders, is if you don't plan for that about, I'm going to say 2 to 5% mortality risk in all of your hatchlings. And that's not to say that they're all born with some congenital heart issue or major kink defect or they end up prolapsing because they become so dehydrated. But I'm saying, just plan on it. So when you remember, we're talking about planning your vending or your expos and how you can improve your sales instead of ruining your sales. You want to plan those expos that you'll vend and the number of animals that you'll vend minus that 5%. And that 5% could include the animals that you're having to assist feed. That could include some that have some kinking disorders, some that just don't make it out of the egg. Whatever it is, you want to actually plan for that so that it doesn't derail you in your process and the animals that you're able to take that are both healthy feeders and they're thriving, right? And that's the number one thing, is we want to take healthy, thriving animals. At any point that you see that an animal is not thriving or that it's not healthy, don't take it to the expo. Don't pass it on to someone else, because, again, this is your credibility and your brand.